at the University of California, San Diego. I will let him do most of the introducing. And after he is finished speaking, we will have a chance to ask him answer or try to answer questions. The purpose, as I said, one of the purposes of this forum is to really try to reach an understanding. So we are inviting speakers that come at the issues in animals and research from multiple perspectives. So I would encourage you all to clap for the speaker, and those of you who agree with him can cheer for him, and then the others try to ask some probing questions. Let's really try to have an outstanding discussion about this. Again, that's really part of what this is all for. With that, I will mention at the end that I will be kind of running the questions at the end, and I've seen in the past there are times where people get up and give a mini lecture, either as a preface to a question, or maybe that's all they're doing. And I'll try to discourage that tonight. Try to keep your questions to under about 30 seconds. And if it's getting a bit long, I may stand up. Otherwise, I'm ready now to turn it over to our speaker, and I'm very honored to have you as the kickoff speaker for this forum. Thank you, Larry.
I feel very honored to be the initial speaker for this, I think, very important forum. And I appreciate the privilege of getting a chance to talk to you people about something that matters a lot to me. And it's funny that I find myself kind of nervous and anxious about this. I'm a blatherer by trade. I talk all the time. And yet when I find myself talking about animal welfare issues and animal research, it just sort of goes up a notch. And I find myself much more emotional about it than when I'm teaching just generic neuropathology or neuroanatomy. So you have to forgive me if I sound more anxious than usual. Trust me, I could bore the pants off you if you were talking about anything other than animals and research. I wanted to start by tooting my own horn. There are a few more obnoxious sounds than someone tooting their own horn. And so I blame this on my wife because she was helping me prepare this, and she said, first of all, you have to show them your credentials. And I said, but that's very self-aggrandizing, and it's kind of embarrassing. She goes, trust me, no one will pay any attention to you unless you establish your credentials. I'm married to you, and I don't pay any attention to you. So you have to tell them why you have an opinion about this as a result of your life experience in research and medicine. And I was having a discussion with some members of the panel earlier about words and how important words are. And I'm kind of a word nut, as a matter of fact. And probably because I was a literature major, and so words are a big deal to me. And I always teach by going back to the etymology of words. And I always say if you have to have a conflict about what a word means, we'll go to the dictionary. And Noah Webster is trump in what a word actually means. The interesting thing about words, of course, is that words don't just describe reality. Words create reality. And people know that, and they try to frame arguments, and they try to influence conclusions by the way words are used. So we have to be very careful about words. But I'm going to be using some words today that will be, some people will say, are inflammatory or emotional. And so every time that happens, we're going to go back and touch base with what the dictionary definition is and see if that is a valid application of the word. Speaking of words, credentials comes from the same root as credibility and credence, in Latin for trustworthiness. So this is supposed to make you trust me. Because I've been looking at medical practice, and I've been looking at teaching and research for a long time. The thing about credentials, I like credentials. They get you a job, and then they get you promotions and all. But every once in a while, they take you to strange places, like Madison, Wisconsin, in the dead of winter. And the reason I got involved in animal issues is some medical students initially came up to me when I was teaching medical students, and I also practiced medicine. And these students at UCSD, and all of the stuff I'm talking about that I can vouch for is from UCSD. I have reason to believe that much of it is similar to what goes down at the University of Wisconsin. But I want to stipulate that I can be an expert on the University of California use of animals and a couple other contexts. And I will defer to local authorities as to whether that applies to what's going on at the University of Wisconsin. Anyhow, at UCSD, some medical students came up to me and they said, you make no secret of your affection for dogs. You know that they're still killing dogs in freshman physiology and pharmacology. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And then they asked me, well, you practice medicine. They tell us that you need to kill these dogs in order to be a doctor. And we want to know if that's true. And I said that was clearly not true. And one of my guilty secrets in the past is when I was a medical student, I killed dogs. I killed a dog in physiology, and I killed another dog in surgery because they told me to do it. And I was just too gutless to stand up to authority figures at the time. And now that I've been practicing medicine for a long time, I realized how unnecessary that was. I often get stumped by a diagnosis. I do clinical pathology. I look at brain tumors from all over the community and even all over the world, actually. So I'm something of an expert in brain tumors, and sometimes I get a brain tumor and I don't know what it is. And I have to show it to colleagues and do special stains, and I have to weasel and equivocate. I've never been in a clinical situation where I thought if I'd only killed more dogs, I'd be able to help this patient. So I told the students, no, you don't need to kill dogs to be a doctor, but don't take my word for it. So we organized the Doctors Against Dog Labs, and we got 300 San Diego physicians to sign a petition urging the physiology and pharmacology faculty not to kill dogs. We said, we're doctors, we know you don't need to do this, don't kill the dogs. But they were PhDs, and they thought they knew what it took to be an MD, and we said, you know, you're not even doctors, not real doctors, no offense, but you don't practice medicine, and it got to be a big brouhaha. So that's how I got started in animals. And then some notoriety came from that, and I was contacted by an animal welfare group that asked me to look at a grant that contended it was going to help find the cause and cure of Alzheimer's disease, and it was a primate vivisection grant, and it had to do with looking at the visual pursuit, smooth visual pursuit, and the vestibulo-ocular reflex. And I'm going to talk about that at some length because I got a copy of the grant and I read it, and I realized they had to work hard to find a system less related to Alzheimer's disease than the visual vestibulo-ocular reflex and smooth visual pursuit. It has nothing to do with Alzheimer's disease. So I went up to San Francisco and tried to persuade their board of supervisors to prohibit this particular experiment that was going on at UCSF. It's a funny paradox. The two places that I always think of as the most liberal, the most knee-jerk liberal places are the People's Republic of Berkeley, around San Francisco, and the People's Republic of Madison. And those are the two places where they do the most primate vivisection. It seems very odd to me. Anyhow, so that's how I got involved in all of this stuff. And that's, the tenure is kind of nice. That allows me to come here and make these kind of presentations and they can't fire me. So that's how I got started with this. And so today I want to talk about the ethics and efficacy of experimentation on animals, common ground or no man's land. Three things. Ethics is it right or wrong? Is it a good thing to do or is it a bad thing to do? And efficacy is, does it work? Does it produce the result that it promises to produce? If a primate vivisection experiment is sold as this is going to help find the cause and cure of Alzheimer's disease, is there any evidence that that's true? And would that change our final conclusion? Do the ends justify the means? Basically, the ethics of doing research on animals, as far as I can tell, always come down to the ends justify the means. So we have to know what are the ends. Are the ends to learn more about visual tracking? Are the ends to learn more about the vestibulo-ocular reflex? Are the ends to increase our basic neuroscience knowledge of neurophysiology? And if those are the ends, then the question is it worth making the monkeys go through some pretty horrible experiences to do that? Or do you want to raise the ante and say, well, no, the ends are to cure human diseases. And if this will cure human disease, maybe we'd be willing to do something to a monkey that we wouldn't be willing to do if it was just to find out more about the neurophysiology of the vestibulo-ocular reflex. So that's efficacy. Does it work or not? And experimentation on animals, again, I want to define terms very carefully. We're only concerned with experiments that hurt animals. Nobody cares. Matter of fact, we kind of like it if Jane Goodall wants to crouch behind a bush and take notes on what the chimps in Gombe are doing. And I know a guy who does experiments on dog intelligence, and people bring their dogs, and they love it. It's like when you do infant development experiments, and people bring their babies, and they find out how smart the babies are. So nobody cares. That's great. Love those experiments. We're only concerned with experiments that harm animals physically, which is vivisection. I'll define that in a minute. Or psychologically. Harry Harlow is a big hero around here, I notice. But he really did pretty horrible things. He did what I think is psychological vivisection. He managed to prove that you can make a monkey fearful, neurotic, miserable, almost suicidal. And he proved that happens when babies don't have their mothers. And in California, the kid would kind of go, well, But anyhow, I think of some psychological treatment of animals amounts to psychological vivisection, but that's kind of a stretch for the definition. So let's define our terms. Ethics of experimentation on animals. We're first going to look at the ethics. Is it right to do this or is it wrong to do this? And then we'll look at the efficacy. Do the experiments produce the promised result? So first of all, history gives us no reason to think that the ethics of scientists are any better than the ethics of non-scientists. Quite the opposite, in fact. You can do some very efficacious science that's totally unethical. And you probably are all familiar with the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, and the Guatemalan syphilis experiments, and the Willowbrook hepatitis experiments. And in my field, there's a disease called Hallervorden-Schwarz disease, which was named after Dr. Hallervorden, who was a Nazi, no hyperbole, no exaggeration, really a Nazi doctor. And he was interested in some mentally impaired children. And as long as they were exterminating them anyway, he said, listen, boys, bring me those kids' brains. And he published 12 papers after the war. And it was good science. There's no doubt about it. It was good science. It's valid science. We still know that the disease that he described causes certain signs and symptoms. The confusion comes when we start talking about good science. But science isn't good or bad. Science is an amoral enterprise. Science, when we talk about good science, what we really mean is valid science, reproducible science, science that teaches us something about the way the world or the way animals or the way humans work. That's valid science. But it gets confusing when we start to say that's good science. It's not good in the moral or ethical sense. It's simply valid science. And efficacy and ethics are uncorrelated domains. There's no reason to think as efficacy goes up, ethics goes up, or that it goes down. There's no relationship at all. It might be very efficacious if somebody really annoys you to shoot them in the head. That's very efficacious, but it's not very ethical. So there's no inherent relationship between ethics and efficacy. And it's confusing to talk about good science versus bad science when people think good and bad means right or wrong. And then I was making these slides again. I think I would have made a separate slide with just this sentence on it, and I would highlight it and underline it and put an asterisk by it. That like-minded people and groups gravitate to the more extreme positions held in common. And I think that's the foundation of all of this conflict. And that was discovered by psychologists, group psychologists, and they didn't bolt anybody into a chair or drill any holes in their skulls or anything. They did very ethical experiments, and they found it's a little bit counterintuitive. But you get like-minded people, and they don't gravitate towards a bell curve in the middle of their commonalities. They skew to the far left or to the far right. It's a little funny. So liberals who only hang out with liberals don't end up being sort of moderately left of center. They become very liberal. And the same thing with conservatives. And if you don't believe that, all you have to do is channel surf over to Keith Olbermann for a while. And he's funny. I enjoy Keith Olbermann. And he's ranting and raving, and he's frothing at the mouth about liberal causes. And then, for a change of pace, you can go listen to Glenn Beck. And you realize, oh my God, like-minded people in groups gravitate to extreme positions. And they've lost their reality testing. And I think that explains a lot of what goes on in what I call vivisection, and I'll define that term in a bit, is that the people who do it and the people who approve it have already concluded that it's okay, and then they become increasingly extreme. I'm going to show some pictures of primate vivisection, and when I was getting this talk ready, some of my best friends are vivisectors in one sense, and I work in a neuroscience laboratory. I work with guys who do rat and mouse work. They don't really vivisect. They create transgenic mouse models, and then after a while they test the mice to see how smart or stupid they are, and then they kill them. But it's not quite the same thing as vivisection. They don't actually operate on them while they're alive. Anyhow, they walked in while I was getting some of these pictures ready of some of the primate research, and they recoiled in horror. They go, oh, come on, nobody does that. And I said, yeah, people do this. I mean, they said things like, those pictures must be faked. And I said, no, they're not fake. And this is from people that actually experiment on animals for a living, but they're just rat and mice men. And when I was protesting outside the neuroscience convention, there was a big neuroscience convention in San Diego, and I'm like a dork, I'm holding up a sign with a vivisected primate on it. It was surprising how many of the neuroscientists who would come by and they'd say, geez, that's terrible. I only use rats and mice. I never do such a thing. And the problem is, again, this like-minded people in groups gravitating to the extreme position held in common. And that's actually, I'm going to come up with a solution to all this, and I'm sure everyone will agree at the end, and we'll fall into each other's arms and sing Kumbaya. I think ethical determinations about doing science should not be left to scientists. Because the scientists are the least qualified people to make ethical determinations. Their ethics are no better than ours. Well, I'm a scientist, so I kind of want to play both sides of the street. But the ethics of a scientist is in no way better than the ethics of a non-scientist. And history actually indicates they might be worse. They have all the expertise in the world to talk about efficacy, about how to do something, but they're not the ones to say whether or not we should do it. Just like war is too important to be left to generals, I think ethical decisions about whether or not to do vivisection should not be left to vivisectors. In law, there's the term of recusal. They're the first people who should be recusing themselves. The people who tend to profit, literally profit in that they make money, and profit in their careers and their publications and their research agendas, they'd have to be saints not to be influenced by that. But the way the system is set up now, they're the ones who make the decision as to whether or not we should proceed with primate vivisection. They're the ones who populate the IACUCs. I apologize for dropping acronyms, but everybody knows what an IACUC is, right? Institutional Animal Care and Use Committees, IACUCs. Okay. So, back to words again, and I've already gotten into, I would call it a disagreement or an argument, but I've already gotten into a semi-spirited discussion as to whether it's fair to talk about vivisection. And people sure do like to spin. You might not like Bill O'Reilly, but I like his concept of a no-spin zone. And I think we should use words the way the dictionary defines them. And everybody is guilty of trying to spin or slant or euphemize or frame an issue to lead to a foregone conclusion. And it drives me mad. And so here I'll be an equal opportunity offender. I can piss off the pro-abortion people and the anti-abortion people and the conservatives and the liberals, because everybody does it. Everybody thinks their cause is so just that it's fair to spin or slant or distort. And here's one more unnecessary offense to the audience. I'm an animal rights guy. I love dogs and all that kind of stuff. But here's an offensive metaphor to use. I don't have a dog in this fight about abortion. I don't feel strongly about it. So I can see both sides trying to manipulate people in the middle. So, for example, anti-abortion tells you exactly what these people believe. They think we shouldn't do abortions. But instead they want to be called pro-life. Well, who's not pro-life? A lot of people are pro-life, but the anti-abortion people aren't necessarily pro-life, not otherwise specified. They might agree in capital punishment. Or they might be carnivores and like to eat steaks and they want the cows to get killed. There's a world of difference between pro-life and being anti-abortion. And the pro-abortion people are just as bad. They think abortion sounds kind of nasty. Who wants to be pro-abortion? So they're pro-choice. Well, who doesn't like choice? Everybody likes choice. But the pro-abortion people don't really mean choice not otherwise specified. They might not want you to have a choice to go to a gun show and buy an assault rifle. They just want the people to be able to have abortion. So call it pro-abortion, call it anti-abortion. And this kind of stuff goes on and on. Government revenue enhancement instead of taxes. Government investment instead of spending. Affirmative action instead of quotas. And this was big in Vietnam when I was dodging the draft. The preemptive reactive strike. So, well, it was really an attack. A preemptive reactive strike. They used that term, the military guys. And then I always kind of like, this came out in the Gulf War, servicing a target with ordnance as opposed to bombing. You know, maybe it'd be better to say bombing. And one of my personal favorites is a long time ago they changed the name of the Defense Department, or the War Department to the Defense Department. And then more recently, of course, in the Iran-Iraq War, we have enhanced interrogation techniques instead of torture. So let's all lay down our arms for spinning, and let's go to the dictionary. And I brought this definition from a book called Medical Meanings, because I always teach with etymology, so it gives you the etymology of words. And so I got this from Medical Meanings, 2nd edition. I didn't make it up. This is how vivisection is defined. Let's call a thing by its right name. Vivisection is the performance of experimental surgical procedures on living animals, especially in the pursuit of biomedical research, from the Latin vivare, to be alive, and secare, to cut. So we're talking about primate vivisection. And animal researchers, like all the rest of us, kind of like to make themselves sound as inoffensive as possible. So a lot of my vivisection colleagues will say we're biomedical researchers. But there's a lot of biomedical research that doesn't involve vivisection. So they're spinning. Or they'll say we're research neuroscientists. There's a lot of research neuroscientists like myself that don't vivisect. So let's just call it vivisection. And then is vivisection cruelty? Now, I'll run the risk of being offensive, but we'll go back to Noah Webster's dictionary. Seems like a fair, unbiased source. Noah Webster didn't have a dog in this fight either when he wrote the dictionary. So, is vivisection cruelty? Well, the definition of cruelty is disposed to inflict pain or suffering. So it could even be psychological, but certainly it's physical. causing or conductive to injury, grief, so that could be psychological or pain. So are vivisectors engaged in cruelty to animals? Are vivisectors engaged in torturing animals? And again, some people will say, oh, now, you're using emotional language. You're being emotional and not rational. Well, I don't know how to be more rational than to go to the dictionary and check it out. So look at the definition of torture. So torture is anguish. That's basically really bad cruelty, or of mind or body agony. And I came across this while I was preparing these slides, the United Nations definition of torture, which I'm not saying applies to vivisectors. It comes close, but it drops off by one word. The United Nations talked about torture as an act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining information. So if you take out the person part, that's a pretty good definition of animal research. I mean, the animal researchers, I do not believe, the vivisectors, I do not believe are sadists. I believe they are doing this to get information, and they are willing to do it to get information. And it's kind of like that same question about, well, do the ends justify the means? And when they were using enhanced interrogation techniques in Iran and Iraq, or waterboarding, they would say, well, we need to get this information to save American lives. And if you had a guy and you were sure he knew that a plane was going to hit the World Trade Center, and you could get that information from him, you might say, go ahead and torture him, because you'd save 3,000. Do the ends justify the means? On the other hand, these were just Joe Schmo Iranians or Iraqis or whatever they were that were in prison, and they were kind of torturing them to keep them in line. Maybe the ends don't justify the means. But I think that you could certainly say vivisection meets this definition, except that it's applied to an animal instead of to a person. So, by definition, Noah Webster's definition, all vivisection is at least cruelty to animals, and some rises to the level of torturing animals. And if you want to contend that cruelty and torture are too strong to be accurate, ask yourself this question: if they were doing it to me, would I consider that I was being treated with cruelty? If they were doing it to me, would I consider I was being treated or tortured? And if the answer is yes, it would be cruelty to me or torture to me, then it's cruelty or torture to the other primates. Or so I believe. We should not shy away from brutal words if we are unwilling to shy away from brutal deeds. So I believe. I know some of the vivisectors, some of the animal researchers, biomedical researchers, are thinking that those are pretty strong words, pretty tough talk. How many people have seen the movie True Grit? I just saw True Grit. In the classic John Wayne version, there's this scene where the Duke is at one end of a valley, and he tells Ned Pepper, he says, I mean to kill you, Ned, or take you to Fort Smith, where you'll hang at Judge Parker's convenience. And Ned Pepper, who was played by Robert Duvall, goes, I call that pretty bold talk from a one-eyed fat man. So you might say, hey, cruelty, torture, I call that pretty bold talk for a skinny-ass Californian. So let me see if I can prove to you that this is cruelty or torture if you ask yourself the question, would it be cruelty or torture if it was done to me? So again, I want to not wander off and make overarching statements. I want to talk about my experience, stuff I can back up. I have documentation. I have copies of the grants where these things are described. And this is the one I got involved in at the University of California, San Francisco, when initially some animal welfare people said, this grant, in its introduction, says that these experiments will help find a cure or a cause for Alzheimer's disease. And we wonder, you being an Alzheimer's expert, is that true? And so this is what they do to the macaques, the monkeys in this grant. And I'm told that similar stuff goes on at the University of Wisconsin, but I know this goes on at the University of California, San Francisco. So this is a grant looking at the smooth visual pursuit. So it's studying how we track moving objects, which is actually pretty cool. I mean, I'm a neuroscientist, I'm a neuroanatomist, I think that's cool. How do we track an object across our visual field? We can do it smoothly if we're following an object, but if we try to just move our eyes in that same arch, we do it herky-jerky. So that's interesting. How do you manage to smoothly pursue a moving object? And it also studies the vestibulo-occipital reflex, and that's the hookup between your inner ear and your eye muscles. And in clinical practice, sometimes people get nystagmus, so their eyes beat in different directions. And sometimes, not that it's ever happened to me, but if a cop pulls you over for a drunk test, he'll have you follow his finger. He's looking for nystagmus because that's a manifestation of impaired vestibulo-occipital reflex. So it's all very interesting neurophysiology, no question about it. And it's actually valid science. But in order to study those things, this is what they do to these macaques. They put titanium plates and bone screws into their skulls, so that they can put the monkey into a frame and you can't move his head, because if you're going to measure his eye movement, you can't have the head moving around. And they put eye coils into the sclera of the monkey's eyes, and they put a cylindrical recording chamber into the monkey's skull, so that they can put an electrode through the recording chamber and insert it into the monkey's brain so they can measure the activity of individual neurons. And they implant similar chronic electrodes into the monkey's cerebellum so they can measure the activity of the flacculonodular lobe. And they put vision distorting spectacles on the monkey, and they have to wear them for 12 weeks. And they put these cylinders actually in the monkey's skull bone. Now, the mastoid process of the temporal bone is where your inner ear is, and that's where the vestibular apparatus is. And to study the vestibulo-ocular reflex, you have to know what the vestibular apparatus is doing, so you have to put a cylinder in there inside the bone. So that's a lot of manipulations. That's a lot of surgeries. If they did it to me, I'd say I was being treated with cruelty. In fact, I would say I was being tortured. And you can ask yourselves whether this would amount to cruelty or torture or not. And then, and this is kind of the over-the-top frosting on the cake, is after all that's done to the monkey, in order to get the data that the researchers need, has to voluntarily track a moving object. So that they can record what's going on with the eyes, and what's going on in the cerebellum, and what's going on in the cerebrum, and what's going on in the vestibular apparatus. And that doesn't work unless the monkey has his head immobilized and you can see what his eyes are doing. But the monkeys don't want to do that. The monkeys, be fair, are pretty pissed off. And I can understand them. So they get the monkeys to do it. They fluid deprive them so that they are dehydrated. And then they put a little hose in their mouth. So if the monkey tracks, does his trick, so that they can get their readings, he gets a sip of water. And I read this rant, and I was just amazed, and I recoiled in horror from it. And I found out, and the monkeys can't even drink their fill on the weekend because they have to be thirsty to get to work on Monday. And they describe this as fluid deprivation to provide a work ethic. A work ethic. Now that's spinning for you. Nobody objects to a work ethic, but you might object to fluid deprivation. And then, and this is the point where they kind of lose me. I'm actually being very serious about this, but in general I get in trouble for being very politically incorrect, and I make jokes all the time, and I get called to the dean's office for too much horsing around. I agree with Oscar Wilde that life is far too important to take seriously. Except I get serious about this primate vivisection stuff, and dog vivisection, and cat vivisection. But I wonder, are these guys trying to be funny? This is from the grant, and this is a quote from the grant, is that collars can be hooked with a pole to allow us to escort the monkeys to a specially designed primate chair. I'm thinking, are these guys like Snidely Whiplash or Simon Legree? Are they twirling their mustache and they're saying, we can escort them to a specially designed primate chair? I mean, that's not the image that comes to mind with escort services, you know? That's not what an escort service does. Oh, you have to pay plenty to get an escort service. They hook them up with collars and they drag them by poles. They're not escorting them to a specially designed primate chair. It's an especially designed chair in the same sense that the electric chair is specially designed. So when I read this, I wonder, are they kidding around? Or do they just want to use words in a very special way? It sounds much better to say we're escorting them to a specially designed chair than we're dragging them to be trussed up and have their heads bolted into a frame. And these are some pictures of these guys. So this is a picture a friend of mine took of Frick. And Frick is a macaque, and he's from the University of Utah. And he's in one of these experiments. And here's his collar that you can hook up with a pole. And here's his head with the bolts and the plates in it. And here's Frick in his cage. And it's my impression, it's my contention actually, that first impressions about cruelty to animals are very reliable. They're almost never wrong. When you see an animal and you think it is being treated with cruelty, there's almost never an explanation. You're like, oh, I was wrong about that. I think first impressions are very valid. So here's the first impression. This is what they're doing to Frick to learn about smooth visual pursuit and the vestibulo-ocular reflex. And these are some pictures that friends of mine took from Covance. And this is Covance in Vienna, Virginia. And Covance, I guess, is a major player in the primate vivisection world out here, too. So these are other experiments that are going on at Covance. And it's kind of hard to see what's going on here. You say, well, what is this? The guy's got his gloves on, and he's on top of this cylinder, this tube. What's going on in that tube? You can't really see it too well. I'm sorry. There's a monkey in there. there's a primate in there, and he's in this clear plastic cylinder with his arms pinned down like that to immobilize him so that they can do more research on it. And so ask yourself, if they slid you into a clear plastic tube and immobilized you, would you conclude you were being treated with cruelty? Or would you conclude that you were being tortured? And here's a monkey, Cobance again. He's stretched out on a rack, and here's something to age me. Say, look away from the gruesome picture, and I noticed that there are some gray hairs in the audience, along with my own gray beard. Oh, by the way, it's short term. This is a tangent, but I noticed you have a lot of Lincoln stuff. Lincoln is a big hero of mine, and Lincoln supposedly was sitting with this attorney general, and the attorney general had a white beard like I did, and he had completely black hair. And so somebody said, "How come your hair is black and your beard is white?" And Lincoln said, "It's obvious. He talks more than he thinks." So I see some gray hair here. Obviously, I talk more than I think. But is there enough gray hair that anybody besides me remembers the Art Linkletter house party show? Art Linkletter was great. And he had a segment called Kids Say the Darndest Things. Kids Say the Darndest Things. And so it's been my experience, because I work at a animal research-intensive university, that vivisectors say the darndest things. When I discuss these kinds of issues, that I think this is wrong, an ethical judgment, and he's a friend, as close as I can be to a friend with a vivisector, he said, no, the animals don't suffer that much. And I'm going, wow, what would it take before you say that much? I mean, with this kind of, why isn't this that much? And he dismisses it. And then I was watching a taped presentation from one of these sessions where one of the faculty members said one of the darndest things. He said that this is a sacrifice that we are willing to make to advance the health of our own species. And that reminded me, speaking of old fuddy-duddy stuff, of the old joke from Tonto and the Lone Ranger, where they're surrounded by Indians, and the Lone Ranger says, "We are in a lot of trouble, Tonto," and Tonto goes, "What do you mean we, white man?" So I mean, we are willing to make this sacrifice to improve the health of our own species. The guy on the table is not the vivisector. The guy standing up is the vivisector. The guy on the table is the one that's being sacrificed. And it's not even a sacrifice in the Old Testament sense of the word. In the Old Testament, you would give up, you would burn the fatted calf. You had an animal that mattered to you, an animal that you were going to eat or you were going to shear, and you gave it up to please God. You give up something that you value. Obviously, they don't value these monkeys, and they're not even their monkeys. They are our monkeys. We buy these monkeys. These are taxpayers' dollars for these monkeys, right? So they're not even sacrificing their own animals. So that was a weird thing. This is a sacrifice we are willing to make to advance the health of our own species. And another one of the darndest things they said is when I was trying to end the dog labs, one of the physiology professors came to my office. And he said, "Hansen, I don't see what your problem is. Because to me, there's just a thick black line between humans and animals." And I thought, well, what kind of physiologist are you? I mean, that's the strangest thing in the world for a physiologist to say. I mean, if evolution teaches us anything, if science teaches us anything, if biology teaches us anything, it's that there's no thick black line between humans and other animals. But the vivisectors, they really want to have it both ways. They want to say that there's this thick black line, so we don't need to treat animals the way we would want to be treated. And we don't need to worry about their pain and their suffering and their fear and their terror because there's this thick black line. And then the anti-vivisectors will say, well, then there's no justification for doing this because you can't get valuable data to improve the health of your... Oh, no, they're close enough for that. They're similar enough to us that we get valuable data, but they're not similar enough that we have to treat them the way we would want to be treated. So it seems to me they kind of want to have it both ways. Vivisectors say the darndest things. And here's that poor monkey stretched out, not suffering that much, according to some of my friends. Well, and that sacrifice thing is interesting too, because, like I said, the people on my floor, and some of these guys are my friends. I'm not happy with what they're doing, but they don't vivisect. They just they make transgenic mouse models, and then they kill them. But when they get ready to kill them, I hear them talking in the halls. They never say kill. They never say we're going to kill these mice. You got to go down and kill these mice. It's always sack. We got to sack, sack, sack. And so I asked them, well, why do you say sack? And they said, well, it's short for sacrifice. And I said, well, why do you say sacrifice? And they say, because we're sacrificing them for... And I said, well, you're sacrificing them for your interest. And that's not the way a sacrifice was supposed to go in the Old Testament. You're supposed to sacrifice something. Anyway, they want to use sacrifice. Because it's back to words again. They don't want to walk around saying kill, 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 even though that's what they're doing. We even use words to disguise the truth from ourselves, or so it seems to me. So okay, the last picture before we go on to the next topic is, this is a guy in one of those specially designed primate chairs. Sorry, he doesn't project very well, but here his feet are tied, and his tail is tied, and his chest is squashed in there. And I'm not sure which experiment they're doing on him because his head isn't bolted, so he might not be in one of these vestibulo-oculo-reflex visual tracking. But if they were doing this to me, I'd think I was being treated with cruelty. Okay, so let's switch to efficacy. I think the vivisectors can correct me on this, but my understanding is that their argument is that the ends justify the means. Is pretty much it, ethically. That we are doing this in order to improve the health of our own species, and therefore the monkeys are just kind of screwed. Or we are doing this just to advance our knowledge base. Knowledge is good, science is good. I'm a scientist myself. I've got lots of publications. I do science. I'm a huge fan of science. And so some of the vivisectors would say, well, we're doing this to increase our knowledge about the neural control of eye movement during smooth visual pursuit and the vestibulo-ocular reflex. Is that fair? Yes. Is that true? Yes. They are doing that. They are accomplishing that. It is good science. And then the question is, but look at the cost to that monkey. And they would say things like, well, it's a sacrifice we're willing to make. But that's because they're like-minded people in groups. I think if you were to get a sample of Wisconsin citizens and ask them, is it worth it to learn yet more? These experiments have been going on for 30 years about visual pursuit and vestibulo-ocular reflex. Maybe the people of Madison would disagree with that. But the like-minded people in groups are influenced by that phenomenon that they skew to the extreme position where pretty much anything goes. But okay, be fair. It does increase our scientific knowledge. And then does doing this to Frick advance the health of our own species? Well, that's interesting. Another one of the strangest things vivisectors say is I've published on this at the Chronicle of Higher Education, and one of the kind of irate letters I got back from a vivisector, because I was saying how this has nothing to do with Alzheimer's disease, he said, Dr. Hansen cannot possibly know that it is beyond the realm of possibility that someday, somehow, this will affect human health. And I said, well, you got me. I mean, it's pretty damn hard to prove anything is beyond the realm of possibility that someday, somehow. And what that means is, for them, anything goes. Because nothing is beyond the realm of possibility that someday, somehow. But I would suggest that if you're not in that like-minded group of people skewed over to the left, before you would allow this much pain and suffering, you'd want a more direct connection to how it's going to help people. And even then, some people would say it's not worth it. Opinions would vary as to whether the ends justify the means. And what I have found, at least in this study, and I don't know if people in Wisconsin do this or not, this is from the grant. This is from the grant when I first got involved. They said, this may allow us to find the cause and ultimately the cure for many diseases of learning and memory, such as Alzheimer's disease. Nothing to do with Alzheimer's disease. Monkeys don't get Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease does not affect the visual tracking system. Alzheimer's disease does not affect the vestibular nuclei. It doesn't affect the cerebellar-flocculonodular lobe. It doesn't affect the oculomotor nuclei. Nothing to do with Alzheimer's disease. And I've been following them around for years now, making this point. And when the grant came up for renewal, perhaps I flatter myself, but I notice now, because it's been going on for 20 years, they took out the Alzheimer's disease. And no, the newest incarnation of the grant says it's going to shed light on the normal functions and pathways that are compromised in many strokes and motor disorders, and potentially lead to new therapies for assisting recovery from strokes. Strokes? It's got less to do with strokes than it does with Alzheimer's disease. Strokes are all about blood flow. They're all about atherosclerosis, stenosis, thrombosis, ischemia, withholding blood, tissue death, infarction. I'm a stroke guy. I know at least as much about strokes as I do Alzheimer's disease. It has nothing to do with strokes or recovery from strokes. So why do they do this? I think that they do this in an attempt to deceive, although like-minded people in groups, if you hook them up to a lie detector, they would probably say, well, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that someday, somehow, this will have something to do with strokes. So I'm not telling a lie. One of the more honest responses that I got after I published that article was from somebody who does this kind of primate research, and he said, that's just grantsmanship. He goes, those of us who approve or disapprove primate research, we never pay any attention to whether it has any application to human disease. All we care about is it good science. So I got to respect the guy for his honesty. And I think that that's usually the case, is all they care about is good science. But they want to make you care about it, because I think most of you, or at least a lot of people I know, would say this is too high a price to make Frick pay to learn yet more about visual tracking and the vestibulo-ocular reflex. But I don't know, Grandma's getting kind of foggy, and if this will cure Alzheimer's disease, okay, Frick, time to bolt your head in there. They're appealing to our fear and our selfishness. They're appealing to the worst aspect of us. They want us to throw all the other animals under the bus. And then this is another point I want to make. This drives me nuts. It's dangerous to interrupt people when they're congratulating themselves. Because when you pat yourself on the back and you're startled, you can just look at a shoulder or an elbow. But they will say things like, the sacrifice we're willing to make to improve the health of our own species, which is a noble motive. Everybody wants to improve human health. If that's really their motive, if their motive isn't just basic neuroscience, which I suspect it is, if their motive isn't advancing their research agenda or getting tenure or writing more papers or learning more about basic neuroscience, if their goal really is to improve the health of our human species, there are better ways to do it. Just in 2010, there were 10 million preventable deaths. People that died of diarrhea, which we can prevent, people that died of pneumonia, which we can prevent, we can treat and prevent. It turns out if you really want to improve the health of your species, putting the monkeys in a chair and bolting their heads in there is not a very cost-effective way to do it. If you really want to save millions of lives, and that's what they say is their motivation, I'll take them at their word, to improve the health of the human species, let the monkeys go, and instead, send soap to Pakistan. This was a study where they looked at what's the effect of hand washing on the prevalence of pneumonia and diarrhea in Pakistan. People didn't know to use soap. Turns out that if you teach them how to use soap, you cut the rates of diarrhea in half, so instead of 2 million kids, 1 million kids die. You cut the rates of pneumonia in half, so instead of 4 million kids, 2 million kids die. You save 3 million kids with soap. So if they're going to justify what they do based on improving the health of our own species, I think they are, to use another dog metaphor, barking up the wrong tree. Okay, thus primates. But it's interesting, I got into primates secondarily. I really got involved in this animal stuff because of dogs. Boy, do I love dogs. And I got into this because the medical students asked me, could I help them protest the dog vivisection labs at UCSD. So this is a dog, and I don't know if it projects very well, but this is a therapy dog. And this is a dog who's visiting somebody in the hospital who's obviously pretty sick because she's got an IV in there. And one of the advantages to being a doctor is that I do go to the hospital 3 times a week, and I run into the therapy dogs. I love those guys. Therapy dogs got the little green jackets, and I always just drop down to my knees and I get some therapy. Because dogs are just, they love us. And dogs are to love the way salt shaker is to salt. I mean, they just sprinkle love on you. And if you look up to be, let's go back to definitions and stuff, look up the scientific name for dog. It's Canis lupus familiaris. And it doesn't mean familiaris like familiar or commonplace or everyday. It means of the family. Member of the household or an intimate. And dogs are the way they are because of us. We've been selectively breeding them for 10,000 years. That's a lot of generations of dogs. And every time we've been selecting for dogs to love us. That's the behavior we select for. And now they have no choice. We've created these animals that are hardwired to love us. Here's somebody loving a patient who he has never met. But the love is sincere because he can't help it. The salt comes out of the salt shaker. So you take this dog to the hospital and loves the patient, and the patient recognizes that. The patient responds to the love. And I guess you could say, oh, I'm being emotional again. I'm using words like cruelty and torture and love, but those are all animal behaviors too. Dogs really love us, and they can't help it. We've done that to them. And so to do anything to a dog other than treat it like a family member is a betrayal. It's a betrayal of a bond between a species that goes back 10,000 years. Everybody likes to talk about how, well, human animals, non-human animals. Yes, there are differences between one kind of animal and another. Humans are animals, but we're different from the other animals. And maybe that gives us the right to do what we want, or maybe it doesn't. Dogs are different from other animals too, and we've made them that way. We have made them addicted to humans and to human love. And to treat them badly is worse than treating other animals badly. I think I'm not big, I'm a vegetarian and all that stuff, and I'm not big on factory farms or steaks, but if you're a pig or a cow, you're just kind of screwed. You have no reason to expect anything better than that, because humans have always been eating pigs and cows. And if you're a primate, no wonder you have to have the collar and get dragged, because you know that somebody is trying to do really bad stuff to you. But a dog and a cat, also 10,000 years of selective breeding, they love us. They love us. So the dog therapy is nice. I was at Dog Beach with my bulldog, and I met a guy with his dog, and dog's talking, and we're talking, and his dog was a rescue dog. And they'd been down to Haiti after the earthquake, and his dog had saved 15 people from the rubble after the earthquake. And now his dog was too old to do that, and so now he's retired, and he goes to the children's hospital and visits kids with cancer. I said, that's what you can do with dogs. Or the vivisectors can do this with dogs. Yeah, so this is from Huntington Life Sciences, and I don't know what it would take for them to switch the name to Huntington Death Sciences, but here they are giving toxic fumes to beagles in toxicology studies. I have two beagles. Naughty dogs, sweet naughty dogs. And if you look at the Lab Animal magazine, they have these painful ads of a beautiful beagle there, and they say, our beagles are so friendly, they will never bite. You can do anything to them. Yeah, so beagles are cute. They're so cute. They're even cute when you're killing them. The only time a beagle isn't cute is after you've killed it and you've autopsied it. So at UCSD, where they were killing 50 dogs a year to teach physiology and pharmacology, they ended up with a pile of carcasses like this. Big bags of dead dogs. And we protested that a lot. And because we're academics and you want to do it the academic way, first we had the 300 doctors sign a petition saying, please don't kill dogs, you don't need to do that to be a doctor. They ignored us. And then I did a peer review paper. I did a survey of all US medical schools. And I found out that 95% of US medical schools killed no animals to teach pharmacology, let alone dogs. And 82% killed no animals to teach physiology. So I thought, well, okay. I got it published. It's on my CV. And so I said, okay, I will send this publication to the IACUC. And the IACUC was mandated by an amendment of the Animal Welfare Act. And the IACUC's mandate includes the 3 R's. You are supposed to replace the use of animals when alternatives are available. That's one of the 3 R's. So I sent to UCSD IACUC my article, peer review article with the statistics. And I said, it is incontrovertible that there are alternatives. If 95% of schools don't do this, there must be alternatives. You're not pursuing the alternative, you're ignoring one of the R, you are in violation of the Animal Welfare Act. And that was a very formal thing. And the response I got back from the IACUC was they had reviewed the dog lab issue, and they found, and this is quotes, that it raised no animal welfare issues. And I'm thinking, if lifelong caging, followed by vivisection, followed by killing, is not an animal welfare issue, what is an animal welfare issue? And that's the problem with IACUCs, is they just don't say no. Yeah, so that's dogs. And then because I also have cats, it's funny, some people say they're dog people and cat people. That must only be people that haven't had dogs and cats, because cats love you just as much as dogs do. They're just a little less overt about it. They're a little more subtle. They'll wait till you're asleep, and then they'll jump up on the bed. But they love you. Because of 10,000 years of selective breeding, and they can't help it. So I think there is an ethical difference between doing bad things to dogs versus doing bad things to rats or mice. It may indeed be a horrible bad thing to vivisect rats and mice, but it's not a betrayal of a bargain. It's not a betrayal of a species that we've genetically engineered to love us. And the same thing with cats. And of course, people do the same thing to cats. I got involved in this. This is a study that's being done, of all places, at the Weizmann Institute in Israel. And this is a study that they want to look at Purkinje cells. I'm a big fan of Purkinje cells. They're big in neuropaths. We look at Purkinje cells all the time. Selectively vulnerable, Purkinje cell atrophy, ataxia. I love Purkinje cells. So this study it provided proof for the existence of long pauses in the Purkinje cell simple spikes activity, probably reflecting underlying bistability of membrane potential in the awake and behaving animal. And I will give them credit for this. They didn't contend it had anything whatsoever to do with human health. They just wanted to know that the Purkinje cells had a bistable membrane potential. And the IACUC said, sure, go ahead. So, obviously I'm a dog man and a cat man, and I'm a monkey man. And so I try to get UCSD, and again, I defer to the experts on site of what goes on at the University of Wisconsin. I said, look, leave the dogs alone because they love us so much. Leave the cats alone because they love us. And leave the primates alone because they are so much like us. And in terms of literary construction, the sentence should be, we should avoid vivisection of primates because they are so much like us, and we should avoid vivisection of dogs and cats because they like us so much. But it doesn't like us so much, so I'm willing to sacrifice the literary qualities because they love us so much. So just leave them alone. And in the defense of their animal use, they say, well, 97% are mice and rats, nobody cares about them, and less than 1/10 of 1% are monkeys, dogs, and cats. So that's like, you can forget 1/10 of 1%, it's trivial, unless you're one of the dogs, or cats, or monkeys. And so I said, okay, great. I said, I'm not nearly as radical as some of my friends, and I am willing to throw the rats and mice under the bus if I can do something for the monkeys and the dogs and the cats. Meet me 1/10 of 1% of the way. Is that so much? Just leave the dogs and the cats alone because they love us, and the monkeys because they like us. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And it's interesting, they like to use terms, the vivisectors do, they like to talk about animal rights extremists. We're always extremists. And they like to sort of hint that we're a little bit dangerous, that we're a little prone to violence. We're extremists, we're radicals, we're dangerous, we're prone to violence. Well, let me put it to you. If there's a dispute, and one party wants the other party to meet on 1/10 of 1% of the way, and the other party says no, who's being the extremist? And where does the violence come in? I'm just the dork holding a sign in front of the convention center. I'm not the one who's killing those dogs, and vivisecting those cats, and drilling and impaling those monkeys. So my contention was, when you find yourself on an ethical, slippery slope, build a terrace. We're not going to get them to leave the monkeys, or not going to get them to leave the rats and the mice alone. I'm sorry about that. I feel bad about that. But I'm close enough to 60 now. I can see 60 very bright and clear from where I am. I'd like to accomplish something in my life before I check out. And I think I can get the public to support me in banning vivisection of monkeys, dogs, and cats. They're not going to help me with rats and mice. So build a terrace, leave the monkeys, dogs, and cats alone. And if they would do that, it's interesting, if they would do that, the animal researchers would leave alone those animals, most of us would stop protesting. I grant you that might be bad, and Gandhi and St. Francis of Assisi they feel bad about that, and they're much better men than I am. So I just kind of want to try to go after the low-hanging fruit and get them to leave the monkeys and the dogs and the cats alone. Is there any hope? Is there any hope for the animals? Well, actually there is. I'm a pathologist, so I'm by nature kind of a cynical guy because I see an awful lot of dead people, and I see an awful lot of people's brain tumors that they're on their way to death, and I see Alzheimer's disease that we in fact can't cure or do anything about. So I'm kind of cynical and pessimistic, but there is reason for hope. If you look at the historical record, there are animal abuses that are no longer legal. Again, back to Lincoln, because Lincoln is a local hero around here. Lincoln said about slavery, he said, we believe that slavery is wrong, and like any wrong that some men will commit if left alone, it ought to be prohibited by law. Well, we believe that cruelty to animals is wrong, and like any wrong that some men will commit if left alone, it ought to be prohibited by law. So no, we're not going to persuade the lifelong vivisectors to give up their drills and their hammers. You have to understand, for vivisectors, doing this to animals is not a last resort. It's not like, oh gosh, we have this one question, if we can just do this one experiment, we get the question, we really hate to do this, it's a last resort to cause pain and suffering. For the professional vivisector, vivisection is the first choice. That's how they pursue their careers. That's what they do. And they don't think there's anything wrong with it because they are like-minded people in groups and they're slammed over against the one extreme position. So we're not going to persuade them. Although, in fairness, there was the Apostle Paul on the Damascus Road, so there is historical precedent for a dramatic conversion, and the guy who wrote Amazing Grace and worked for the abolition of the slave trade was a former slave ship captain. So twice in the last 1,000 years, people have changed their minds. So there's hope, but I wouldn't count on it. So instead, we're going to have to pass laws and protect these animals from the vivisectors. So bear baiting, bull baiting, dog fighting. And dog fighting, that's interesting too. If you read what happened to Michael Vick, he was surprised as hell that he was doing anything wrong. He was in a group of like-minded people. He was raised with dog fighters, and he hung around with dog fighters. It was kind of a clue when he named his kennels the Bad News Kennels, what he was up to, and he kind of caught it by surprise that, gee, a lot of people think this is wrong, because he was in a group of like-minded people. And a lot of the primate vivisectors are kind of surprised. Well, maybe the primate vivisectors are surprised that people think what they're doing is wrong. But the encouraging thing is, the closer we get to the people, rather than the experts, the more you leave the fate of animals to people with a vested interest in using them, the worse off the animals are. I mean, once upon a time, no doubt, the guy who was running the bear baiting ring said, well, what are you interfering with my bear bait? It's my bear. You can't pass a law that says I can't bear bait. It's my bear. And Michael Vick would say, well, they're my dogs. I can do whatever I want. But it brings to mind this politically incorrect joke that I think covers the hope for the animals. So the joke is this, and this is more typical of me, because I am politically incorrect, and I get told it. So this really, really rich guy is at a party, and he sees this gorgeous woman over there, and he goes up to her and he goes, I'm really rich. I am like Bill Gates rich, and you are hot. Would you have sex with me for $1 million? And she's like, $1 million? I mean, how long could it take? And I'd be set for life, and I could go to school, and half an hour? Okay, I'll do it for $1 million. And then he says, great. He says, now will you have sex with me for $10? And she goes, $10? What do you think I am? And he said, well, we've established what you are. Now we're just haggling about price. So that's what we've done with animals. We've established what we're going to interfere with people. We're going to stop people from doing things to animals, even if they are their animals that we disapprove of. Now we're just haggling about where we draw the line, okay? We're going to stop bear baiters. We're going to stop bull baiting. We're going to stop dog fighting, cockfighting, crush videos. There are animal cruelty felonies in 46 states, and animal law is a huge, burgeoning field in law schools. California Prop 2, you probably heard about that. That's a proposition that we passed in California that tells you, if you're a chicken rancher, that the chickens can't be in cages so small that they are unable to spread their wings or stand up and turn around. They used to have they couldn't stand up or move their wings. And every time this happens, every time there's a movement to improve the quality of animal life, the people that are most involved with the animals will say, well, we're the experts, we're the chicken farmers, we know what chickens need. The factory farmers, we know what pigs need. Well, this Prop 2 banned gestation crates for sows, and it banned veal crates for little calves, and it banned battery cages for chickens, despite what the factory farmers said. The encouraging thing is, the closer you get to the people, the better the animals do. If you make a statewide proposition, like California did, Prop 2, the agriculture industry is against it, the chicken farmers are against it, the veal, they're all against it. But if you get enough people, the people will actually give the animals a break. They get closer to the people, and just recently in Missouri, there was an amendment to the Constitution to ban, or to improve the supervision of puppy mills. Missouri is the biggest puppy mill state in the country. There are more puppy mills and dogs in cages, miserable, horrible lives. They go to the pet stores. And they had a huge lobby fighting against this Missouri puppy mill amendment. And it passed in Missouri, where there are more puppy mills. Because there were enough people. You get a big enough N, and you'll get a pretty good idea as to what's ethical. You just need a bigger N. And the problem with IACUCs is they don't have anybody on there that represents regular people. Or if they do, they're routinely outvoted, and they're just a token. But the IACUC is interesting. The Animal Welfare Act was actually passed in 1965 in response to a just horrific photo expose in Life magazine about concentration camps for lost and stolen dogs. Class B animal dealers were stealing dogs out of people's yards, or taking puppies from a pretty good home ad and sending them off to animal research facilities. And somebody took these pictures, and as a result of that, they passed the Animal Welfare Act. And the Animal Welfare Act was later amended to mandate these IACUCs. And the animal welfare people thought, oh, this is great. There's going to be somebody with a voice on the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. Turns out anybody who uses any animals in a university setting has to get approval from an IACUC. And so the animal advocates were thinking, this is great. There's somebody looking out for the animals. Turns out it didn't work out that way. But there's another phrase that at least the IACUCs exist, and if we could amend the law so that there could be a broader representation of citizens on the IACUCs rather than just the vested interests of the vivisectors, it could actually work. There may well be a case where they have a hot new treatment for spinal cord paralysis, and maybe somebody could persuade the general citizens that if we paralyze this monkey and then try to cure him, it'll directly lead to treatment of paralyzed veterans. And maybe the citizens will say, okay, then the ends do justify the means. Maybe so, I don't know. But they have a right to weigh in on it. And they certainly have a right to weigh in on whether vestibulo-ocular reflexes is going to cure Alzheimer's disease. I think they'd call that one in a second. So IACUCs are interesting because I think they are, to use a phrase I once came across, hypocrisy is the compliment that vice pays to virtue. So the existence of IACUCs is kind of a rubber stamp, and it's a fig leaf, and it doesn't really protect the animals, but the fact that it exists is the hypocritical compliment to the virtue of looking out for animals' interests. Banned vivisection of great apes. Do you think the vivisectors wanted them to do that? No. Swiss Supreme Court refused permission to do these kind of visual tracking experiments because they said there isn't enough direct relevance to human health. So this is too intense cruelty and insufficient justification. Same thing happened in Munich, same thing happened in Berlin. They banned those exact same experiments that I'm trying to get them to stop at UCSF and that are going on in Wisconsin. Oklahoma, for God's sakes. Oklahoma, a red state. The Oklahoma State University administration was confronted with an issue that somebody had gotten a grant to do anthrax vaccine testing on macaques. And they said, no, you're just not going to euthanize primates on this campus. Oklahoma, take that, Madison, Wisconsin. But Dane County, the Dane County Noble attempt, when I gave this talk before that initiative failed, I always thought Dane County was showing the way. This is the idea, is you have to have citizens who are not prejudiced in favor of animal research on a panel to balance the people that are in favor of it. You could say, okay, all the animal researchers have to recuse themselves because they're hopelessly biased by their research agendas, and nobody's allowed on here who's a PETA member. Let's just take guys from the sandwich shop, okay? And then the PETA guys can make their case, like jury duty. They send out a jury duty, a summons, and you have to decide what's going to go on. That's what I did. Okay, so I kind of blathered and blundered my way through this, and it's because it means so much to me. I'm less articulate and less funny than usual. So I will end with a guy who's much more articulate than I am and much wiser than I am. And this is Mark Twain, and he said this when he was inducted into the London Anti-Vivisection Society. He said, I believe I am not interested to know whether vivisection produces results that are profitable to the human race or doesn't. To know that the results are profitable to the race would not remove my hostility to it. The pains which it inflicts upon unconsenting animals is the basis of my enmity towards it, and is to me sufficient justification of the enmity without looking further. It is so distinctly a matter of feeling with me, and is so strong and so deeply rooted in my make and constitution, that I am sure I could not even see a vivisector vivisected, within any more than a sort of qualified satisfaction. I do not say that I should not go and look on. I only mean that I should almost surely fail to get out of it the degree of contentment, which of course it ought to be expected in French. So I'll leave him with the last word. Thank you very much.
Hi, Ron Shepard. Very much enjoyed your talk. I'm on the planning committee. I'm also a bioethicist here at UW. I was curious if you would be interested in elaborating a little bit on the role that you think the public or members of the public should be playing in oversight, which you addressed, but I was just curious about some of the potential issues with that. We think of the university as a place where you can do research that's unpopular. There are obviously limits on what kind of research can be done, but how do you balance the needs of a vibrant academic environment that can tackle issues that the public thinks are a poor expenditure of their money and controversial, with the admittedly important role for them to play both in overseeing research as well as directing research, right? Providing goals that the researchers can use, and often correcting mistakes that the researchers might make because of some of the blind spots that you mentioned. So how do you, any concrete advice on sort of how to balance those goals?
I think if the IACUCs is probably the best mechanism that's in place to address that. And I think if the IACUCs had a better balance of people research and have every reason to want to continue that, versus people that have less of a vested interest. But I think that you're an ethicist. Do you agree nobody has any claim to having better ethics than somebody else, right? How do you decide whether somebody's ethics are better or worse than somebody else's ethics? So my contention is, since that's a pretty tricky issue, you just need a much bigger N. So you would need to have much bigger IACUCs with more citizen participation, and at that point it would be majority rules.
So, it seems to me that an issue like this is really an interdisciplinary matter, and there are very few individuals who have the relevant expertise in all the different areas that feed into the ethics question here. So ideally, I think you wouldn't want to exclude, for example, all scientists on the IACUC or even all animal researchers, but you would also want somebody who's familiar with the legal aspects and somebody who's familiar with the ethical aspects, so that the committee as a whole was balanced. So I wouldn't say that any individual committee member or any individual type of member is going to be the expert that we'll defer to, but it would be more an issue, I think, of balance.
But there's a book called What Animals Want, and it's written by a guy named Larry Carboni, and he is a veterinarian who's been on the IACUC at the University of California, San Francisco since 1986. And he has obviously approved all of the primate research that I've been showing you pictures of. And from his book, he makes these points about the way IACUCs are currently structured. He says, few people realize that virtually nothing is prohibited by the Animal Welfare Act, so long as it can be justified to the Animal Care Use Committee. Nor do IACUCs, by and large, function by rejecting animal protocols when the ethical costs are too high. Rejection of protocols is not what IACUCs do. The IACUCs focuses on reworking the details of the protocol rather than judging its ethical acceptability and handing down a rejection. I think that you need a mechanism that does an ethical cost-benefit analysis, and IACUCs don't do that.
Hi, my question feeds right into that one. Oh, my question feeds right into that one. For about the past 3 years or so, I've been attending the IACUC open sessions, the graduate school, which covers a lot of use of primates. And over the years that I've been there, I haven't heard that argument being discussed that you just said at the end there about the ethicalness of it. I haven't heard one protocol that was rejected out of hand. It's only been deferred and all that to retool the protocol to make sure USDA likes what they're reading. And the one from this past Monday, could you speak to a little bit about, they were going round in circles about more than momentary pain. I mean, it was like a twilight zone at this meeting. More than momentary pain, and how to word it so that questions 16A in the protocol, if you know what that means, that it's written right. And then you are a neuroscientist, so the research, the protocol that they were discussing had to do with adolescent, they want to see, apparently the goal is adolescent brains on meth and cocaine. And they're using 28-day young mice for this study. The neurophysiology and all of that, what kind of benefit are they going to get on it? So I guess it's a two-pronged question.
Yeah.
The more than momentary, and just the neuroscience correlating what happens to this little mouse to what it's going to tell you about adolescent brains. Thank you.
I just happened to be looking at this book by this veterinarian. I wanted to read a couple more paragraphs from it, and then I'll address your question as best I possibly can. It says that at bottom, American IACUCs are more technical committees than ethics committees. Their work centers on reducing the costs of animals, largely regardless of weighing any of the potential benefits. And that's what that one honest guy said when he responded to my article in the Chronicle of Higher Education. He said, we never take into account whether there's any applicability to human disease. We just want to know if it's good science. To the abolitionists, this will seem like tinkering. Animal protectionists envisioned a bigger role for IACUCs, and one that excluded rather than refined painful experiments. And they wanted a place at the IACUC table for one of their own, an animal advocate unaffiliated with the research institution standing up to the scientists. IACUC committees have not evolved in that direction. The law has never required or encouraged it, and very few IACUCs hold a seat for a representative of an animal protection organization. Those are the facts on the ground. Your point about whether or not you can even extrapolate from methamphetamine neural damage in a young mouse to tweakers or whatever they call people that are taking strange drugs, yeah, adolescents. It seems like there's an incredible species barrier there. I am. This is a nice, Niels Bohr, one of his definitions of an expert. An expert is somebody who's made every mistake that's possible within a narrow field. So I am an expert because I've made every mistake possible in neurobiology. But I'm not an expert in mouse neuroscience. In terms of whether there's any valid extrapolation, that's just beyond my capacity to comment intelligently on. That's why I wanted to refrain from too grandiose a statement and just focus on the monkey experiments I know about, the dogs and the cats. I suspect that it's unlikely you can extrapolate, but I don't know anything about it.
Momentary pain.
Pain is always momentary.
Versus more than momentary. I mean,
Yeah.
you were grappling with it.
Well, the problem with IACUCs, of course, is they're very legalistic. And again, it's a legalism rather than an ethical or moral dimension that they're dealing with. So that's why the objections 6 through 9, it's like a legal document, and they can check things off. And they don't take a step back and look at the big picture as, well, what we're really talking about is animal suffering. So,
I really enjoyed your talk. So you talked a lot about whether the means justify the ends, and then your example was looking at an experiment that I think everybody would agree that it was justified poorly or for grand gamesmanship. And then you talked about if you could eliminate that 1/10 of 1% of research on monkeys, dogs, cats. What do you think would be the effect if you did actually eliminate that 1/10 of 1% in terms of the science? So clearly there are probably other examples of experiments that are vivisection in nature, that they have more applicable relevance to human health. And so I was just curious what your assessment would be as to the impact of what you would want to do in terms of the policy.
yeah, when I was preparing this talk, and I apologize that I blathered on too long, my original version, I had some data on that. I was at a meeting in Washington, D.C. on looking for alternatives to animal use in research and testing. And I stole some slides from that presentation, which may be unethical. But I stole the slides, and it showed chimpanzee research. Now, chimpanzee research is almost always justified on its applicability to human disease. They use chimpanzees for hepatitis, and they tried to use chimpanzees to come up with vaccines for AIDS, and it didn't work. Anyhow, so this guy did an analysis of all the chimpanzee studies that were done between, I think, 1995 and 2004, and then came up with an analysis of what percentage of those studies were ever later cited in a medical paper that had to do with dealing with human health. And 50% of those chimpanzee experiments sank without a trace. They were never cited by anybody. 37% were cited, but only by other chimpanzee researchers. And 15% were cited in medical research dealing with people. And then he went back and he looked at it, and he assessed that none of the citations, they were citations for the sake of completeness, but they were not fundamental to developing the technique that was involved, was his contention. You would say he has an axe to grind, we all have axes to grind, but his contention was only 15% were ever surfaced in medical literature for humans, and of those, none of those were crucial to the advancement that cited them. So, extrapolating from that, I think it wouldn't have much of an effect on human biomedical progress.
You talked a lot about means and type of analysis, this kind of consequentialist argument. How cautious do you think that we should be getting before we, I would say, shackle this kind of consequentialist argument? Is there a point where the means, even though they might justify the ends from this kind of speciesist calculatory logic that you might still ethically object when we talk about stronger ethical norms for dogs and cats? How do you respond to animal rights critics, et cetera, who talk about moral personhood of animals?
my short version, again, I sound like I'm obsessed with Lincoln because I am. How many people have read the whole Lincoln Douglas debates? Yeah, I like the statue. I'm going to go sit in his lap and my picture taken in the statue. After, I don't know how many hours and hours and hours and hours of debate with Douglas, he said, it comes down to this, that if slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. And my contention is if cruelty to animals is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. And so my contention is that the ends cannot justify the means if the means include cruelty to animals. That's what I believe. But I'm one guy. So if I'm on one of these committees, I wouldn't approve much. It's certainly nothing that has to do with suffering. I might approve things like some of my colleagues do, transgenic mice where the mice are well treated and painlessly killed, maybe. But I think, yes, if you're going to be, it sounds bad to be an absolutist, but you could say Lincoln was being an absolutist. He wasn't very flexible about slavery being a bad thing. So I think the ends can't justify the means if the means include cruelty to animals.
I'm not ready to throw rats under the bus. I think this is a cultural, educational problem, and it's the solution that's been posed to me is that the animal rights movement has not, unlike other movements, has not mobilized itself to become voting blocs, and that it takes very small voting blocs to make a difference in what people do. So I just wanted to offer up to any of you who are interested in helping animals the whole array of abuses that this culture visits, which includes the one I'm working on, which is hunting and trapping. That there's a book called Get Political for Animals that just came out, and I think it's Julie Lewin or something like that. You can find it at Amazon. And they make the case that it takes a very small focus group in the population to organize politically, to make a difference in law. And that's why the hunters have control of our state agencies, because they're a small group, but they're very organized. And they know how to organize grassroots at the county levels. So I think that the challenge for us is to use the internet and other ways of mobilizing political activity to change laws. Because the bureaucracy, and even the university, which is my university, are way behind where people have moved in our perception of what we should do with animals. So more of you out there speaking, you know, I hope you have your program for other people to give, and that you put it up on YouTube and all that stuff. But, you know, I think that we can mobilize. We have the people. We have the consciousness out there. We're just not tapping it.
That's the point I was trying to make, that it's, I think, very encouraging that the closer you get to the people, the better the animals do. It was the people, not the farmers, that passed Prop 2. It was the people, not the puppy mill breeders, who passed the Missouri Anti-Puppy Mill Initiative. And it's going to be the people that rein in the vivisectors. And that's encouraging, that the people, once you show it to them, they tend to agree that we should be nice to animals. You're right, and just as a strategy, this is a tangent, but yes, if you could convince animal people to be single-issue voters, you need a single-issue voter block that you could deliver to a politician in exchange for his support. I'm on the Humane Society Legislative Fund, and we have meetings where they actually talk about targeting particular politicians, and if they play ball with us, we will take out ads in their paper and say they're animal friendly, blah, blah, blah. And it actually, when they will pick an election that's close, and one that's extreme, where there's a very obviously anti-animal guy versus an obviously pro-animal guy, and then they'll put their resources in there, and they've gotten credit for swinging multiple elections. But you have to pick one that's kind of close like that.
A lot of them are.
Yeah, a lot of them are. And it, just as an example, and I am a genetic congenital Republican. I was talking to a businessman out here, and my dad was a businessman, and he didn't like these Democrats and all this liberal stuff, and he used to take me into his office and show me his check on April 15th, and he'd go, those bastards, those bastards. But because I'm a single-issue voter, I will vote for Barbara Boxer. who is anathema to everything else I believe, but she's great on the animals. And the Humane Society Legislative Fund gives scorecards for every animal, every legislator, what their score is on animal issues. And so you might want to check into the Humane Society Legislative Fund because they're big as a political action committee for the animals.
I have two questions. One is I wondered where do the cats and dogs and monkeys come from? What sort of money and businesses involved there? And the second question is, when we sign online petitions and hit send, does that actually make a difference for some of these issues or not?
Yeah, there's another in the category of vivisectors say the darndest things. When we were campaigning against the dog labs at UCSD, there were some acrimonious faculty meetings and pharmacy and physiology people getting really pissed off. For one of the issues that was raised before, they said, you're interfering with my academic freedom. You're interfering with how I teach my course. How dare you tell me how to teach my course? I said, I don't want to teach your damn course. I have a hard enough time teaching my damn courses. I just want you to leave the dogs alone. But he said, but these aren't family dogs. These are dogs that are raised for this. They're bred for this from Huntington Life Sciences. They're not pets. I said, but they don't know that. You can't undo 10,000 years of selective breeding and tell this dog not to love people. A friend of mine worked in the animal facility, and he was going to get a beagle to take her to her fate on the vivisection table, and he opened the door to her cage, and she tried to shake hands with him. She doesn't know that she's not supposed to love people. So yes, most of these dogs and cats are from professional breeders. They're at a place called, Huntington Life Science does it, and there's another one that I'm blocking on. So yes, so that makes it even worse because they're raised in cages their whole lives before they're vivisected. So that's where they usually come from, professional breeders. And second question, do emails do any good? They can't hurt, so I always send them in, but I don't know if they're efficacious or not.
I appreciated your comment about the research that shows that like-minded people tend to, if they say, let's spend a lot of time together, become more like-minded. As I'm sure we all know, it's also true that when groups of like-minded people are attacked, they often become more defensive and more sometimes extreme in their position, and that goes for any kind of group. So my question is what do you think the mechanism could be to find a way for groups to work together in order to actually make progress? And let me just give you an example. As I think many people know, some of the biggest progress in agriculture was made when McDonald's, responding to criticisms about how animals were treated in slaughterhouses, discovered it was very much to the advantage of slaughterhouses to treat animals more humanely because it increased their profit. And so because of that work, the last minutes of life of many animals in agriculture who are killed for food have become profoundly less painful. So it was a win-win in that businesses make more money and animals suffer less. And so my question is, how could that relate to this topic? What do you think, as someone with a paw in science and in both fields, what do you think might be a mechanism to, rather than creating groups forcing each other apart, create a way, some kind of a win-win?
You know, that is a terrific question, and that I didn't develop the theme, but that was where the subtext of my title was Common Ground or No Man's Land. No Man's Land, you have to understand, I teach California medical students, which means that they went to California public high school, so they don't know anything. And so when you say no man's land, you have to explain, that's because they're big on self-esteem. So you can't criticize a California high school student because you hurt their self-esteem, so you can't really tell them that they're wrong. Anyway, so they don't know what no man's land is, but it was the contested terrain between two entrenched positions in World War I. So you're in your trench, you're behind your barbed wire, and no man's land was this crater, cadaver-ridden territory where there was no agreement. Yeah, so that is a great question, and you're right, I have a paw in each camp, and I'm a bad guy to everybody. I kind of live in no man's land because my vivisectors, friends, colleagues, they just think I'm a traitor to the cause, and then the PETA people think, oh, you're throwing the mice and the rats under the bus, and so I'm a bad guy for both categories. And that is such an interesting question, is there any common ground about that? And maybe there are some issues for which there is no common ground. I remember reading, again, a Lincoln story. When Lincoln finally, in the middle of the Civil War, he was very good for trying to find conciliation, and he wanted to contain slavery, and he didn't want to abolish it, and things just got, finally, he said, the differences between us and our enemies are clear. They do not give us any opportunity to deceive ourselves about them. The differences can only be tried by war and decided by victory. You can't be half a slave and not half a slave. So that's why I think trial by war, I don't think there's going to be any shooting war, but I think it's going to have to be, if the animals are going to get better treatment, it's going to have to be legal stuff, and it's going to be forcing, one side has to win and the other side has to lose, I think. I just don't know how you can, people whose values are so fundamentally different, that if you put it in very straightforward terms, the animal advocates care more about the animal suffering than they do about the researcher's science. And the researchers care more about their science than they do about the animal suffering.
But the people, well, here's just one more thing to throw out there, is there a difference between common ground and a win-win? And I guess that's what I'd suggest that there might be. I don't think the people who ran slaughterhouses, although I don't know, but my assumption is that the people who ran slaughterhouses were not that concerned about welfare. They were concerned about the bottom line. They were businesses, they wanted to make money. But there was a win-win that was created. So maybe it's not so much common ground, maybe it's more a way of finding a win-win, whereas researchers to get what they wanted need less funding. It's very expensive to have that. Maybe there's a way to find a solution that uses far less animals, that also creates a situation in which researchers could feel like they are getting what they need as well.
I certainly hope that somebody can figure something like that out. Because I'm in neuropathology, I've been stunned by the research advances in technology. All the advances in neuropathology are all on PET scans and MRI scans, and I'm old enough to remember when they first introduced CT scans. And it's like Watson winning Jeopardy. I mean, the computer's strength is logarithmically doubling. And I think there will come a day, and the vivisectors don't like it when I say this, they say you're unrealistic, blah, blah, blah. What they say is, well, there's no substitute for putting an electrode in a neuron to find out what the membrane potential is, and neuroimaging doesn't have that resolution yet. But an exponential curve is a hell of a curve. So I think a lot of the questions that are being asked, in 10 or 15 years, it'll turn out you can slide a graduate student into a scanner and have him track a visual field, and you'll get the same information. I really believe that's going to happen, and I'm willing to wait for it.
I'm an attorney, and I'd like to put in a plug for the jury system. We've been using it for many hundreds of years, I think, and we use it to determine if somebody will live or die in death penalty cases. We use it to determine whether or not millions of dollars in damages will be paid in extremely complex medical malpractice cases. We use it to determine whether or not some huge corporation is guilty of antitrust violation. So I think that we need to give the common 12 people at the sandwich shop more credit, and I think academics are willing to give members of the community. We have this division between the townies and the people who are living in what we call the ivory tower existence. Now this brings me though to a question I've had a lot, because a few of us met with former Senator Feingold several years ago to talk about the Climate Center. And after listening to us very politely and watching a very graphic video, his words essentially melted down to academic freedom. And you've used that term, and I think that was what Dr. Stryker was getting at as well, academic freedom. Where does that come from, and what are the limits to that? There is no constitutional right to academic freedom that I'm aware of. So where is that? How do we balance that against perhaps the community's input into what goes on in our taxpayer-supported and funded institutions?
Right, and I certainly didn't. I was trying to leave the impression that I'm big on these 6 guys, or 12 guys in the sandwich shop. I trust them. I didn't mean them. They're great. I'd rather have them make these ethical decisions. And it's like William Buckley said, he'd rather be governed by the first 1,000 names in the Boston phone book than the Harvard faculty. So I kind of agree with that too. And academic freedom is originally intended to protect speech. And it's been expanded to say, well, nobody can tell you how to teach your own course. And I think academic freedom, I think you're stretching its boundaries when you say academic freedom means I can do whatever I want with your money. And I think as long as the money is coming from taxpayers, they ought to have a say in what research is done. In my contention. They're stakeholders because they're paying for it.
So is it fair to say that the academic freedom safe harbor has no applicability to animal research? It has to do with free speech?
It was originally founded on free speech. Yeah, it was to protect unpopular speech rather than, but they've expanded it now. They say now we're protecting unpopular laboratory practices, which I guess they consider to be a form of speech. But you know, academic freedom, as I've gotten in trouble a few times myself, is it's not absolute. You can't run around screaming the N-word at somebody in the middle of a lecture without getting fired. I mean, it's like the limits to other free speech. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Academic freedom isn't absolute. It's never been absolute.
Thank you again to Dr. Hansen, and thank you all of you for
I'm 59. I've been sick for 37 years with a lot of very bad diseases. And of anyone who can benefit from biomedical research, I'm a person who has a vested interest. But I also understand, as a scientist and as an educated person who reads a newspaper, that hardly nothing we're getting out of these studies that deal with animals could possibly be applicable to my benefit or other humans' benefit. And I think it's really, the debate has to be clarified in terms of who's benefiting economically from these studies and what the animals are really going through. I think if you really had ever been in a lot of pain or ever gone through surgery yourself, for 5 minutes you'd understand what these animals are going through. It's not hyperbole for us to discuss this in terms of pain and blood. And I also believe we need to recognize that there are about 5 or 8 companion animals, and then there are animals that are like, well, when I say companion animals, I mean dogs, cats, monkeys, perhaps dolphins. But animals have a special affiliative bond to humans, and I believe then that other animals like livestock and sheep have a different sort of mental outlook. And in particular, to do research on companion animals is just appalling. And I believe when the world comes to an end, we're all going to have to face what we've done to them. I believe we're all going to have to face our maker, and we're all going to have to understand what we did. But there's absolutely no benefit that can come medically from what we do to them. We can only be ashamed.